What's a really awkward situation that everyone can relate with? Saying hello or how are you to somebody and getting 100% ignored. Worse when someone else you know is there too and notices you getting ignored. That's when I just say good talk. Helps me feel like I save face just a bit. Someone showing everyone in the group something on their phone and waiting until it is your turn. Even worse if it never makes it to you and you have to pretend you're not secretly dying to know what it is. Being expected to make polite conversation while having a gynecological exam. There you are, tussie exposed, legs spread wide, someone is stuffing something up your vagina, and you are expected to be able to talk about the weather. Also, when your dental assistant wants to chat, but her hands are in your mouth, so. Having your stomach rumble in the middle of a quiet class/meeting. Edit, both in college and at store meetings, my go to cover up strategy was to furiously flip through pages of notes to try and drown it out. When I feel anxious, my stomach rumbles uncontrollably, several times per minute, even. This started to be a problem in school because it would rumble constantly throughout exams and was super embarrassing. But soon enough, anytime I was in a quiet public situation, I'd be dreading my stomach rumbling and that anxiety would cause it to rumble. This went on for probably around 5 years and it was hell for me. I used to try so many techniques to suppress the rumbles. Eventually, I figured out it was anxiety related and that I was unknowingly causing my own stomach to rumble uncontrollably by making myself anxious about it rumbling. Since then, it's been a lot easier to manage. I just focus on my breathing and try to break the cycle by not thinking about it. I'm glad you've been able to make it easier on yourself. Congrats on your anticipated full control of the grumbles. The fake smile on your face when you receive a terrible gift. Wanted the Smash Mouth CD with All Star on it when I was a kid. My aunt wound up getting me the Len CD with Steal My Sunshine on it. Apparently I hadn't heard the song yet back then, even though it was all over the radio. My disappointment was immeasurable and my day was ruined. I faked a half smile. Decades later I love Steal My Sunshine and I should have been happy. Your comment made me think of all the CDs I bought for one song when I was a kid only to realize that the song I knew was the only good song on the album. I'm genuinely happy that music consumption doesn't work that way anymore. When you are video chatting, start talking and, because of the delay you interrupt each other all the time. Stop talking, start again, interrupt the other one, stop talking. Never ending story. Followed by 30 uninterrupted seconds of Cold War silence. Followed by interrupting each other. This goes on forever. When you've had multiple interactions with someone, but you can't remember their name, but it's gone too far to admit you've forgotten it, so you just have to call them love or mate forever. I met this guy in my math class at the beginning of the semester and I never caught his name. We became friends and now it's the end of the semester and I still don't know his name, not sure how to ask. I once got set up on a blind date by a friend. The guy was her brother. I unfortunately didn't catch his name, though. So when he shows up to pick me up, I'm like, you must be Elaine's brother. I'm Mamak at 13 hoping he'd say his name. He didn't. We dated a few weeks before I saw a bottle for his asthma meds in his car and got his name from that. When you say a funny joke but all you get is silence. I did this on a Zoom staff meeting yesterday. It was worse online, somehow. Now you're that guy in the office. When you think someone waves at you, so you wave back, but they were waving at someone behind you. Just pretend you wave at someone behind them, then the person behind them would wave back at you, but you should pretend to wave at the person behind them, and so on and so forth, until everyone is uncomfortable and just go home. Not long ago at church we were asked to turn and greet people. I turned around, and the guy said hi to me, and stuck his hand out to shake. I went for it, and realized he was talking to the woman beside me. She and I both ended up with a hand in his hand at the same time trying to shake it. They both looked at me, and I quickly turned around, and pretended it didn't happen, which made it more awkward. And then rest of the service I couldn't stop laughing about it. This is standard for me. When you're finishing up at the checkout and the cashier puts the notes on top of the receipt and then coins on top of that. Then the next person steps up and you're fumbling, trying to disassemble the stack in your hand, gather your shopping, say thanks and move away at the same time. When I was a cashier I made it a point to hand them their coin, hand them their currency, and unless requested otherwise, I would put the receipt in the bag for this very reason. Same here. A manager taught me that. I was so annoyed with him at the time, but now I realize what a good tip it was. When you reply to a stranger who says hello, but then realize they were on the phone and not speaking to you. Happened to me just yesterday, and I didn't get any sleep last night as I couldn't stop reliving the moment. AirPods have made this one so much more common. It's really annoying, especially if you work in retail. I used to go to college with a girl who got the same train home as me, and we would always walk to the train station together chatting. But as soon as we sat down on the train she would call one of her friends without warning and start talking to them on hands-free. So I always, every single time, thought she was talking to me and I'd reply and she'd ignore me. Cringe every day. When you're saying goodbye to someone and then you both end up walking in the same direction. Or when you turn and walk into a wall with people watching. Edit. My first awards ever. So glad my forms of awkwardness resonate with others. Also when you realize you've forgotten something and need to turn around, but you don't want to just turn around abruptly because that would make you look insane. So you do a little performance where you get your phone out, pretend to check a message, sort of mime aha, and then turn around. Or cross the street and then turn around to throw any observers off the scent. I used to do that until I read a very similar comment on Tumblr. Now I just turn the duck around and go where I wanted to. When you're having a conversation with someone and you don't hear what they say, so you ask them to repeat and they do, but you still don't hear it, and ask them to repeat again and they do, and you still don't know what they said. Do you ask them to repeat again and maybe still not hear it? Pretend you heard it and nod your head and hope it's an appropriate response? Stab yourself in the eye with a pen to create a diversion and change the subject? Happens to me all the time. I think I have bad hearing maybe. Sometimes I think I have dyslexia of the ears. It's called auditory processing disorder. I always say huh, just as I figured out what they said. When you're walking past coworker and you've already said hello earlier, everyone's making that weird flat smile. That walk down a long hallway toward each other where you've clearly seen the other person, but they are too far away to say something. So you do the awkward look around until you get close enough to say hey and keep walking. Edit. Thanks. I work in an office above a warehouse and the hallway goes the length of the entire warehouse. It's like that never-ending hotel hallway in The Shining. There are departments all along the hallway, so people come out of doors from each end. It's the worst to start walking from one end and someone comes out from a door at the other, and I'm just praying inside they enter into another door before we get to each other. But it never happens. We always end up crossing paths, but until that point, I'm looking everywhere but at that person. Looking into other offices, pulling my phone out for no reason to look at it. The only savior is when you have a box or paperwork in your hands that you can focus on, and then when the other person is within 5 feet of you, say hey and keep walking. It's utter misery every time I have to go into the hallway, which is a lot. Go to wash your hands and the water comes out at 1,000 miles an hour, splashing your crotch. You are of course at work. And then you're just standing in the store waiting for it to dry and patting it with TP, but it's taking forever and someone is pooping next to you. And here is where it happens. When someone keeps calling you by a wrong name, you let it slide to begin with thinking they have just made a mistake, but then it carries on for such a long time that you can never correct them. I called a guy John for months until finally we were interacting, and he looks at me like, why do you call me John? My name is Bill whoops. It's funny because my usual go-to if I don't know someone's name is Bill. I was dead convinced this guy's name was John. It isn't exactly the same, but in middle school I had this teacher that everyone hated, and me and this kid who sat next to each other could never tell who she was calling up to her desk or calling on to answer a question. Our names aren't even that similar, but she pronounced them both blatantly wrong, and since we sat next to each other, if she was generally looking in our direction we would both just look at each other and be like, was it you? Or me? IDK. How ya doing to be? He said, "Hey Toby, want a donut?" I wanted a donut. Now it's 5 years later, the donut's gone, and I'm still Toby. When you go for a hug, but the other person goes for a handshake, so you start with a handshake, but do a weird hug at the same time with your hands in each other's crotches. I just skip all that, and go right for the crotch. That awkward moment, when you're trying to grab someone's crotch, and they shake your hand. Standing there while two people talk about something you don't know about. Even worse when you're wanting to leave the conversation, but feel like you need to have an excuse to leave. I have to poop and giggle. Let them figure out which is more awkward. I think you misunderstood the term for shoot and giggles. When you try to contribute to a conversation and someone cuts you off multiple times, and you patiently wait for your turn to speak, even though it already was, but by the time the air is clear, the subject has already changed, and what you were going to say is now irrelevant. I used to be a habitual cutter offer when I was younger. I wasn't trying to be rude, I was just excited for what I had to say. I've reformed that behavior now, but if I notice this happening to someone else, I'll make sure to call attention to the person trying to talk. "What was that, John?" or something along those lines, to make sure everyone is heard. When you start to tell a story in a group, but in middle of sentence realize that no one is actually listening, and ever so slowly you get quiet and hope no one took notice. Edit. Wow, seems someone did take notice this time. I asked myself a few times what might be wrong with me BC of this, but I also could imagine I am not the only one this is happening. But I don't think that something is wrong with you. It s just all too often that people just don't think so much. I think people in general mean no harm. They maybe were in this moment just not as emphatic, or don't have the antenna in the everyday hustle and bustle to notice something that doesn't jump in the face with a neon sign. Figuratively speaking, or, as for this case, notice someone's contribution that is not bursting with self-confidence, or provides the perfect introduction, but perhaps acts rather a bit introverted. When they don't realize that you were getting quiet, at first you think good, nobody noticed, but seconds later you start to feel bad that nobody was really paying attention to you, not even hearing that you were making noises, and that feels awful. And then someone says "I'm listening," go on and you wanna hug them. When you're out and someone approaches you with an "Oh hi insert name, nice to see you again," and you have no idea who that person is. I was with my brother once, and we saw a guy wearing a work coat that had his name on it. My brother, being a prankster, sees the name, Bob, or whatever it was, and says, "Hey, Bob, how have you been?" The guy was of course embarrassed, because he didn't know my brother and apparently didn't realize his name was on his jacket. Subscribe and leave a like.